Great. So let's start because we have a packed agenda. Bartel, would you like to go to the next slide, please? So, as I say, we have a packed agenda trying to discuss whether digital technology really can make a difference. And we have, in addition to myself, three really great speakers. Emilio from CGAP will give CGAP's perspective on this. They've done a lot of work recently as part of their strategy preparation, and he's got some great insights. Puneet Chopra will then discuss MSC's work with the government of India on the AgriStack and Digital Farmer Services system, which is mind-blowing in its scope, scale, and ambition. And then Christina will talk about the four lenses that we're applying to the Climate Resilient Agriculture Working Group's white paper, which I will introduce briefly before she discusses those four lenses. So with that, let me hand over to Emilio.
Thank you, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. What I'd like to share is a little bit of a zoom out, trying to frame the challenge to achieve a climate resilient agriculture, which is the topic of interest today, where I will go a little bit on the notion that smallholders and other actors in the agricultural value chains are really facing what I call a double whammy, right? Not only is there an increasingly more frequently climate shocks that are affecting them, but that is happening in the context of a worsening food insecurity crisis. So I'll discuss a little bit of why we think this is relevant for this discussion. Next slide, please. So the smallholder families are back in focus in the global development agenda for very good reasons, right? They are a very large population segment that has been one of the worst hit by climate change. And this is particularly true for women in these families, right? On the other hand, we know that climate change is disrupting food systems in general, where these smallholders play a crucial role. But it's not only on production, but the disruption is really happening across all the different value chain segments, right? In marketing, in processing, and overall food delivery. However, the ones that are hardly hit, like we mentioned, are the smallholders who are responsible for 40% of global food production, right? Sorry, next slide. Now we can go to the next slide. So the idea here is that, we know of the relevance of the smallholder segment, and we know we want to make them more resilient for climate change, right? As we start trying to address this issue, we're recognizing that the challenge is compounded by a parallel need, very urgent need of feeding a growing population. And we are starting to realize that understanding the climate food security nexus is really at the core of us clarifying, what are we really seeking when we say we want to transform smallholder agriculture, and what is really the truly important outcome of this, right? So that we can tailor our strategies towards it. So to start framing this, I like to say around the initial aspect that I like to highlight is that climate change is happening at the same time that a growing global food demand is happening. We have a rising population that it really is expected to accelerate, and it's not going to peak until 2086, according to estimates. But if you look and start segmenting the world, you see that the fastest growth in population is happening in low-income countries, and it's slowest in high-income countries. So this is putting a lot of pressure on food systems that are feeding low-income countries, and relatively lower pressure on food systems that are feeding the high-income countries. Now, why is this important? This is important because it really is driving the investments that the big players in the private and public sector are doing in food systems. First, it's important to recognize that food systems are not homogeneous. They're very different, and they organize different to feed different parts of the world. Throughout, all of these food systems globally are facing a very marked period of increased input costs that is affecting them throughout. And this rising input cost is mainly driven by conflict, right? We're talking about rising petrol that affects all production systems in agriculture, but this is also related to the war in Ukraine and regional conflict and geopolitical conflict, right? That's the reality of what's affecting big investors in agriculture. Now, those food systems that are feeding the high-income people of the world are investing significantly to address the challenge of feeding a global population and making food system more resilient to climate change and actually mitigate climate change, right? Now, the reality is that those food systems that are feeding low-income people across the world are not making those investments. So the results of that is that we're dealing with food systems with very different response capacity, right? Those thriving food systems where that are profitable and are feeding the high-income people of the world propose a tremendous opportunity to benefit smallholders throughout, because there's a lot of linkages through global trade. But the reality is that this food system leave most smallholder out, right? There are very important barriers that would need to be overcome for more smallholders to participate. And then there's also the recognition that for the other food systems that are struggling, they are finding it increasingly difficult to meet food demand, right, for the low-income population. And this is where most of the world's smallholders participate. And they're becoming more and more vulnerable to shocks, especially climatic ones. So this is already happening, we realize, and there's an immediate effect that is already pretty evident, which is of this double whammy that I'm describing on smallholders, and that's food insecurity crisis, right? We already see that vulnerable food systems affected by climate change and outpaced by local food demand are already failing in 48 countries, right? And the risk is that these hotspots, these red spots that you see where the 48 countries lies, the risk is that it increases, right? It becomes bigger with worsening climate. And there's, we can see that this is actually happening. The estimate number of food insecure people in 2023 was 345 million. This is actually more than double than it was just 3 years ago in 2020. So this is important. This fuels a lot of further conflict and political unrest. That's why food security is at the top of the development agenda. But it really is a core part of explaining what digital finance can do to support smallholders and transform agriculture. So there are two main intermediate kind of goals that we want. We want to facilitate climate resilience for sure. We need to facilitate greater productivity to meet a growing food demand at the same time, right? And the ultimate outcome, given the immediate effect of not addressing this, is to be able to promote more sustainable food security. So what are the potential pathways to get there? We start hypothesizing and phrasing this, and clearly there's a need for efforts to ensure that more smallholders participate in those thriving food systems that can offer a lot of benefit in terms of becoming more resilient, more productive, more food secure, and overall well-being, right? Yet this is a partial solution because by the nature of how food systems are organized, this will leave out a big share of smallholders and other consumers in low-income countries. So we also need to invest in ag-tech innovations for those food systems that are feeding the rapidly growing low-income population, and two, where most of smallholders currently participate, right? Now, the type of investments and the type of innovations that financial flows should facilitate are those active innovations that do both. They really allow for mitigating climate change, building resilience against climate change, but they also increase productivity and lower cost to address the global food demand, right? There's already, if you go back up just to the previous one. So the thing is that there's a lot of flows on this type of active innovations, but of course, this is really led by private and public investments to apply to problems of the, let's say, higher income world, right? Those food systems that have the means to make those investments. It's not necessarily happening for the lower income world and the food systems that operate there. So there's a lot of adaptation to those low income contexts, as there's a lot of evidence that active innovation will just not necessarily work, but just replicating, right? So that's an important area of work. If you go to next step, now the questions that concerns us in the financial inclusion community is, how can digital finance contribute to these pathways? And this is where we're very eager to have a debate with the financial inclusion community on how best to do that. We know I think we're starting with a very good base where we know how to build inclusive digital finance ecosystems, right? We know the building blocks that are needed, payment system backbone, you need far-reaching key code networks, you need ID systems, customer-centric products, and all the enabling policies and regulations. This is stuff that we've been working for over a decade, right? Now, the current efforts that are really taking all of these systems to be viably operating in rural areas are still going to be a prerequisite for any digital solution to be applicable to this crowd of smallholders and all the agri-SMEs that work with them. But there are important knowledge gaps that we feel we need to address. We need to know how to tailor these retail financial services, as well as public-private mechanisms of blended finance to generate, adapt, and adopt those active innovations that bring most benefits to most smallholders in different contexts, right, including low-income contexts. And this is where CGAP is trying to shed some light and be able to identify how to focus. And I'm very happy to participate in this webinar because many of the examples that are shown next reflect this type of tailoring and approaches that are being tested. Thank you.
Thanks, Emilio. Over to you, Puneet.
Thank you, Graham. Delighted to be here. Hi, everyone. So, building on what Emilio just described, the smallholder farmers at the bottom of the pyramid are still untouched by the agri-tech innovations and other innovations that are happening. And most of these innovations tend to be still don't have the scale or the reach and are largely still impacting only those at the top of the pyramid or perhaps in the middle of the pyramid. And so I'll talk about AgriStack in India, which is an attempt to try to solve for exactly these problems. And the vision of AgriStack is to create a solution which integrates multiple stakeholders, leveraging shared data, common services, complementary services, and creating a unique value proposition which can have a multiplier impact. And what it is trying to solve for is agri-tech innovators that typically tend to be walled garden. They're limited to the innovations that they have. They do not have the scale and the reach or the investments that Emilio described, are the barriers for them to achieve scale. And so AgriStack in India is an aspiration towards solving for that. And so essentially it is a framework of data sets, APIs, reference architecture, and design that can be eventually created as a digital public infrastructure using open standards and open architecture. And the vision is that in a steady and mature state, it will have offerings and services for everyone in the agri ecosystem, from smallholder farmers at the bottom of the pyramid to intermediaries, market participants across the value chain, from upstream to downstream, government and public institutions, research institutions, and so on. So it kind of addresses the needs of everyone in the ecosystem. Next slide, please. So the fundamental approach of the agri stack is to both use and build on existing data sets, services, and solutions, leveraging them and then building further on them. At the core of it are three foundational data sets or registers. The first one of this is the farmers database, which would have their demographic profiles, detailed demographic profile, along with their land holdings, and often they have fragmented land holdings, so it will bring all of them together so that they can be cross-connected with one another. The second is a land register, which will be geo-referenced data, and therefore it will have the GPS coordinates of each individual land parcel, and it will therefore lend itself to many powerful use cases, which I'll describe, and which can then use the GPS coordinates and the georeferencing of these land parcels. And then the third of this core fundamental register is the crops themselves that are grown on these land parcels, season over season. In addition to these, it will leverage many existing databases and data sets. For example, there is a large fertilizer database of the subsidy on fertilizer, the direct benefit transfer of fertilizers, where every farmer accessing or taking subsidy from that scheme is captured, along with the type of fertilizer they're using, the quantum, the frequency, and so on. Another very powerful database is soil health database, which captures the soil health and the state of the soil, the state of micronutrients within the soil for nearly all the farmers in India. And of course, there are accuracy challenges, and there is a need to fine-tune that, but it's a very good starting point. Another one is a crop insurance database, which again captures a host of farmer related information to enable underwriting of crop insurance, and including the large Prime Minister's crop insurance scheme in India, but also other sort of insurance schemes. And there are other databases like the procurement database of cereals and other produce that is sold by farmers through government systems. So there's a single database that captures that. And together, all of these will then lend to creation of multiple use cases that would be beneficial to the smallholder producers. These are across agri advisory, financial services, whether it is credit, insurance, others, market linkages on input side, on outputs, on value addition, and so on. And then the government programs itself. So, all of these use cases will span across government and private sector, and be of great utility to the smallholder farmers. And this will be through a unified farmer services interface, which will enable easy and seamless plugin of additional services. So it will not be restricted to the initial service that are created, but the fundamental approach is that other service providers, other innovations are able to connect to this, use the power of this platform and the underlying philosophy and design principles to be able to offer their services, while also leveraging the shared data and the profiles which get enriched over a period of time. So it will start, and then as the footprints get created, those profiles will get enriched and lend themselves to use of multiple additional use cases for these service providers. So that's sort of the what's unique about this, that it will leverage best of breed solutions while leveraging common shared data and leveraging the footprints and demographics, and then continuing to build on those. Next slide, please. And if we contrast and compare AgriStack with the India Stack, which is based on Aadhaar, many of you might know about it, which is extremely well known and proven, and it has really transformed micro payments, the payments for digital financial services, as well as payments for the excluded and other use cases in a big way. So Aadhaar or India Stack broadly is a database of residents, which is with a unique Aadhaar ID for each resident. And AgriStack would be a database of farmers fundamentally with a unique farmer ID. India Stack has the demographic information of all the residents. Similarly, AgriStack would have that for farmers, but also, like I described, the land, GPS and geofence tagged information of the land, crops, and then the footprints of the transactions, the the way they interact with the platform. So data points that get captured, and then this profile will continue to get built. And in terms of the interfaces, the whole approach is that there is a very simplified, seamless interface which lends additional service providers to connect and disconnect very easily and seamlessly, without kind of creating complex one-to-one integrations, which just don't allow scalability, and sort of open systems and open architecture. So in India Stack, it is the unified payments interface. Here it is the unified farmer service interface, and then sort of a suitable regulator. So moving on, India AgriStack is a reference framework, and if you were to if you could move on to the next slide. Translating that into action in terms of the actual real platform that is being developed, and while AgriStack as a framework and reference architecture would evolve, the integrated digital farmer services platform is being developed in one of the states in India, which sort of borrows on and builds on these fundamental principles, but and also it will give an opportunity to test and learn, and as it matures, it will have an opportunity to become a reference design and solution for other states and for scaling up across India and potentially other geographies. The way, for example, the India Stack is now and digital ID kind of solutions are being replicated in many geographies. And in terms of some of the design principles, the approach is to try to address barriers of digital and financial literacy, the lack of penetration of smartphones and internet, and inability of many of the smallholder farmers to really leverage them to avail the agri-tech innovations and other sort of needed services for them. And this will be through an approach of a hybrid approach of physical and digital. We know that it cannot be all digital from day one. So there will be enablement of intermediaries, extension workers, and others who will be partially or digitally enabled and be able to then offer services as an intermediate step till farmers gradually start becoming more digitally ready. And other innovations in technology, for example, speech to text, speech recognition, of course, AI, ML, and innovations such as the lack of penetration of smartphones would be addressed through some solutions, although not at full wouldn't have the full power of smartphone-based solutions, but limited offerings that some of the smallholder farmers can also use feature phones to avail services. And we envisage about more than 15 service providers in the next 2 to 3 years to be able to connect with this platform and offer their services and this entire kind of ecosystem, and then lend themselves for scaling and adding of additional service providers, including government's services, private sector, agri innovators, and so on. And so overall, we do see that this has a great potential to enable diffusion of innovations at scale and overcome some of the barriers that we started with. I'll stop here and happy to take questions later on in this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Puneet. So it falls to me to introduce the Climate Responsive Agriculture White Paper, which reflects some of these issues. So we know agriculture, particularly in Africa, is in bad shape. MSc has just completed work with CGAP to look at Bangladesh and Nigeria, and did some work also in India, and it scared the living daylights out of me. For the last decade, there has been a relentless erosion of small farmer income and asset base in a way that I've never in my career seen before. Next, please. And we've got to a stage where incremental changes are simply not going to be enough. We need a full transformation of agri-food systems across Africa, Asia, and indeed Latin America. And we know that this is possible. We have seen it in select countries in all of these geographies. So the question becomes, how can we accelerate the transformation of agri-food systems? And we have a conundrum here, because we have the knowledge, we have the tools, but we don't seem to have very much action. We know that small holder agriculture can be competitive. We know much about the constraints that smallholder farmers have faced over the years. We even know how some of those constraints can be overcome, and have examples of where they have been overcome. And many of the core technologies to adapt to climate change are already available. Particularly in the context of the CFAR Alliance, digital technology already promises opportunities to radically improve smallholder farmer agriculture and address many of those constraints. So again, a question: why are we not seeing more rapid adoption of these technologies? And perhaps, is climate change, as well as being a real crisis, also an opportunity to catalyze transformation? So the CFAR working group, comprising the institutions you see below, is designed to build on and complement the work of its members. And we're focusing on three interrelated pillars: the integration and coordination of value chains, something that the AgriStack that Puneet has just described is also attempting to do; the diffusion of innovations across all value chain participants; and the financing of innovation on an end-to-end basis. So let me unpack each of those one by one. When we talk about the integration along value chains, very often this is, as Puneet has highlighted, using platforms. Small and diversified farming systems can indeed be more resilient and more productive, but they need the resources, the information, and the capacity to link smallholder farmers with the businesses along the value chain. But the market solutions currently available face challenges with communication and technology, with weak infrastructure and ineffective formal institutions to provide the governance and the rules of the game. So what this means is that to effect real transformation, we need to address multiple elements of these challenges simultaneously. And while digital platforms in principle could provide the solutions we need for this integration and coordination, we actually have seen very few successful examples. And it is actually really important that we dissect and understand what makes the success stories, useful business models that we might replicate and pursue. However, many of the success stories are derived from different types of markets and socioeconomic environments. And so while we can learn from them, we will need to tailor them. The second pillar is the diffusion of innovations. And this, for me, is an extraordinary challenge that I think has been under-addressed. We have become very interested in and attracted to developing new digital solutions, new innovations that have the potential. But rarely do we look hard enough at how to drive their uptake and usage. And as a consequence, if you look at Africa, for example, for digital innovations, just 13% have any uptake. 13% of farmers have uptake of digital solutions, and only 5% of them actually use those digital technologies. So while we've got the proliferation of digital technology, and that digital technology covers almost all aspects of agri-food systems, there is a but. And the but is that we've not paid enough attention on how these innovations diffuse across the value chains. So what are the problems? Well, the problems are influenced by a range of sociocultural issues, some of the sort of mental models and frameworks that poorer people use to assess innovation and opportunity, and also their values and their perceptions of risk, and therefore their trust in these digital technologies. And those of you who've been involved in digital financial services will recognize these problems, because we face similar problems in the diffusion of digital financial services. And I think there are a couple of really important areas that are worth flagging in this context. First of all, as Emilio pointed out earlier, women are disproportionately affected by climate change, typically have smaller holdings and therefore less opportunity, but also they are very often the wrong side of the digital gender divide. And so that is one issue that we need to pay a lot of attention to. The second that is very often not recognized is the oral community. In these poorer, more vulnerable, more remote communities, many people are still illiterate and innumerate, and therefore struggle with the traditional interfaces of these solutions. The third and final key aspect that I think is important is youth, because youth has the potential to catalyze change. And we've seen from our work in the field that there is a growing, slow but growing tendency for youth to see agriculture as being sexy again, interesting, because it is digitally driven and enabled. So we need to, I think, leverage youth better than we've done to date. And in that context, the MasterCard Foundation's approaches, I think, have high potential. So ultimately, if we're going to address the challenges of diffusion of innovation, we have to look carefully at the interface between the physical and the digital, because pure digital is not going to work. We need to be very clear about that. And also the informal and the formal. The third pillar is financing that transformation and looking beyond traditional instruments. Smallholder farmers, as with other poor people, need a range of financial services. And financing transformation is going to require coordinated investments, both within firms and farms, but also between firms and farms along value chains. And as a consequence, sort of traditional piecemeal financial products are not going to be adequate. We need a more comprehensive suite. Now, there are already many areas of promise amongst digital financial solutions, most obviously embedded finance, and also some of the PAYGO systems that are used to finance asset acquisition. But I worry that pure market-based solutions will not be sufficient. The constraints in terms of the long-term financing required for transformation, the high risk associated with lending into the agriculture sector, or indeed providing insurance services, particularly in the context of the covariant risk, which is amplified by climate change, means that basic let the private sector or the market take care of it approaches will not work. The good news is that there's a huge opportunity to leverage green finance, whether that's carbon credits or climate or nature-based funding from the international community. We need to look at deploying these funds alongside the traditional financial services approaches. And this means that we have four sectors of finance that we will need to depend on. Next, please. That is the traditional financial services system complemented by the digital financial services of embedded finance, PAYGO, et cetera, the existing informal and community-based finance systems, and those state and international finance funds that will be needed to drive transformation and thus a climate adaptation. Next, please. So we believe that the CRAG working group has the potential to catalyze change. All of our members are implementing a range of projects, and if we enable collaboration across that diverse range of actors and projects, we can pursue a shared learning agenda addressing these three pillars that are so important. So we would love others who share this vision to join us, and as we move forward, addressing these three pillars of integration and coordination of value chains, diffusion of innovations, and financing transformation, we will look at it through four cross-cutting themes. And that is what Christina will now talk about.
Thanks, Graham. It's my pleasure to talk about the four cross-cutting themes for the working group. The first is localization. And as we've been hearing, the solutions really need to be locally customized. But not only that, they need to build local capacity, local institutions, local resources, assets, et cetera. And so we must carry out this work in a way collectively that builds that local capacity, that transfers and reallocates the power from the global north and from the top down into these local communities and institutions, and supporting locally led innovation, locally led diffusion of innovation, to support that uptake. And that's something that's really critical here, and something that will take collective effort from the working group to support that localization process over time. And just as one statistic that sticks in my mind, and really I really can't get beyond, is 78% of the climate finance that is going to Africa is actually going to institutions based outside of Africa. And so there's really a paradigm shift that we need to change here, and that's something that we can advocate for, and also live and embody through our collective and individual work. The second is the issue of measurement and measurement of impact, and how are we building resilience. And that's a That's a very hot topic. It's one of the things I'm here in Bonn, Germany, at the intersessional climate change negotiations, that is working on the global goal on adaptation and trying to define what that is and substantiate that further. Thankfully, this working group doesn't need to get 190 countries to agree to a definition, but by building a collective framework for monitoring impact over time, we develop and have the ability to test and learn across a much greater range of conditions and innovations and settings that will enable us to develop a more robust framework that can in turn serve as a global public good for others entering this space to use as it gets refined and finalized, which I think is a really important contribution and something that we can learn, that we can use to learn, are we delivering the results we need to be and intend to be delivering in the most effective, efficient, and equitable ways possible. And that kind of leads to the third pillar, which is about information sharing and shared learning. This is a diverse community of practice that we have here, and a relatively new area of practice. And so there's a need for rapid and accelerated learning. And by bringing together people from different fields, from different and complementary areas of expertise, different networks, different expertise and experiences to share, it really allows us to draw on that collective body of learning to exchange, to identify opportunities, to identify common challenges and common solutions from each other's work. And so I think that's a really valuable contribution. And then last but not least, there's the need for collective advocacy. And with a collective voice, we can amplify each other's messages and reach greater audiences, raising awareness of the opportunities with digital technology for climate resilient agriculture, but also the need for the investment that we've just heard about, and how that investment needs to be deployed at a much larger scale and in a much more connected and integrated way to catalyze the transformation that I think we all want to see. So I'll leave it there, but hopefully I've expressed some of the benefits and areas of focus of engaging in this working group, and we're certainly open and eager to have greater engagement. Graham, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Christina, and thank you for taking your time out of hand-to-hand negotiation in Bonn. I really appreciate it very much.
Good description.
So with that, I'm very proud because it's one of the first webinars I've been on for a while that actually has left time for questions from the audience. And so I'd like to open it up to those who patiently listen to us and hear from you if you have any questions. Please raise your hand, and I'm sure we will do our best to respond.
And Graham, you've got two questions already in chat. One from Tofene, apologies for pronunciation, around awareness of any tech or digital solutions that have helping to scale syntropic agriculture applications and initiatives. And then I think we've got one from David Del Cerf around localization and how programs like TECA, which is another CFAR Alliance initiative, might be a supporting partner or integrated within CRAG to help accelerate some of those efforts to localization that you and Christina and others have just talked about. So two questions from chat.
Great. I saw the question from Tefone, and I have to confess that I am unaware of any other examples of that outside Brazil. But we can certainly be looking for that. And I think that raises an interesting point, which of course is that while this working group is largely focused on the three pillars, there are of course, other types of technologies that are, growing and that we are not as focused on, and obviously biotech is one of them, and some of these growing techniques are others. So with regards to David, I'd like actually to ask both Puneet and Christina to comment on that a little bit. The Techa Fund, David, perhaps you just talk very briefly about the Techa Fund so that Puneet and Christina have a chance to respond directly to you.
Of course. Thanks, guys, for a great webinar. This is very, very good. So very briefly, because this is not the day to talk in depth about Techa, but what we've done already once, at least in Techa, and we have some great exponents of that in the call, is we convene local innovators who want to launch a startup. They don't yet know exactly what it looks like. Maybe don't have an idea completely figured out. They don't have a co-founder. That's okay. The program supplies that, right? We convene 30, 40, last time it was 30 fellows from 7 different African countries, half of them women, half of them men. And we tell them, look, there's money here. Just you guys form teams, come up with visions for products that you like to build, and pitch the community. And then unfortunately, our resources are limited, but we'll get them where we think they can be the most impactful. And then you launch companies from the ground, building solutions for those communities. Startups take a while to take off, but if you don't start today, you don't have them tomorrow when you really need them. So I'm just curious, as you've been thinking about the bigger picture, and you mentioned the learning agenda. Well, startups are a great way to learn. At the beginning, they're essentially a learning device, a learning vehicle. Doesn't feel like one to the entrepreneur, but in retrospect, that's what they are. So I'm just curious if that's something you think within this context would make sense, or is, as an alternative, a better way to learn to work with more established players, right? That's the alternative typically. So I'm sure there's not an and or. I'm just curious what you think, or either.
I'm happy to start, but I mean, I think that's a great example where you're actually building that local innovation capacity, the capacity to build a startup, to learn along the way, to tolerate the risk, to experiment, to innovate, to iterate on solutions, and that's exactly the sorts of capacities that we need to be building. It may not flourish into the successful at scale company that in the first go, but that's fine. As you said, this is also about planning for the future and thinking ahead to the capacities that we'll need to cope with ever-changing ever numbers of mouths to feed, as well as ever-changing climate. And so I think that's a great example of how we're building that local capacity that in turn builds further capacity, right, as it goes on. And I think that's a really great example and an important point of how the global community can support that local innovation and that local entrepreneur.
And it begins.
Just
Sorry,
adding
go ahead,
that,
Peter.
just adding some thoughts to it, David. So certainly, it's important that local innovations are nurtured, and we are seeing multiple ways in which it is kind of happening. So we're seeing, of course, there is a mushrooming of local innovators in many markets, and the opportunities through accelerator programs, and also for example, a program connected to the one that I described. It's essentially enabling a sandbox environment. So it's kind of supported by this very specific one, supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and GIZ, where they invited many of these innovators to create a sandbox environment for an agri data information exchange. And the innovations that come out of that, and some that have the potential of scale, would be connected back into the AgriStack platform, so that then those with the potential to scale are given that in support of investment and opportunity through this platform to be able to then take it far and wide. So those are some examples where we are seeing this. So definitely very important, and some of these could be kind of avenues for it to happen.
Thank you, Puneet.
Yeah. Great. So let's move on to a couple more questions. I just make the observation that Emilio's point about how a lot of innovation is not focused in the countries that need it most because they're poorer and therefore less attractive in some respects. That is another reason why I think focused assistance to grassroots startups becomes so important. Rahul Prakash, you are most welcome, and please give your question. But you'll have to unmute first.
Hi everyone. I'm Rahul Prakash. I'm founder of Amal Farm. So we work on geographical indication tag agri-based products across India. And we are working with marginal farmers and trying to experiment how this value chain could be tightly coupled with climate resilient model that can not only improve their income through direct selling of produce, but also work as an incentive when we encash those carbon maybe after 5 or 7 years, because this is a long process. You cannot immediately trade a carbon and give it back to the farmers. It takes time, right? But to run the entire model operationally, you need to have a value chain, very strong value chain developed at the local level. And that is what we are trying to do. So now my question to everyone is that, do we have any such successful models where this climate resilient and value chain is tightly coupled together at local level that helps farmer directly earn more income?
That is a really good question, Rahul. And we had this discussion on the Climate Resilient Agricultural Virtual Club, which is separate from the working group. And in the context of India, for all the reasons you talked about, it's a real struggle because of the piecemeal nature of the carbon credits and also the time it takes for them to mature. I am aware that in Kenya they believe that they're further along, and I'm wondering if there's anyone on the call who has experience with what's going on with carbon credits in agriculture in Kenya. David?
Not enough to answer credibly. Sorry, Rahul.
Okay, so Rahul, let me talk around and see whether I can get an answer on that, because it's a really valuable point. I mean, ultimately, in my presentation, I blithely talked about carbon credits for smallholders, but as I say, the piecemeal and dispersed nature of smallholder farmers makes that very difficult because they don't create the carbon credits in lumpy enough, wholesale enough form. Thanks so much for your question.
And just a note on the carbon credits.
Great.
Graham, there are
Jesse.
a couple blogs that have just recently been published by the CARFI working group. I'm not sure if they address your question specifically, but they might address elements to it or offer clues to where you can go to get some more information on that. So we can, if you want to land on the CFIRE Alliance LinkedIn page, you can find them there. We can also circulate in the follow-up to this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jesse. Navraj.
Yeah, Graham, nice to meet you after a long time. Yeah, I think this is a very important event. Thank you very much for organizing this. I just repeat the word that Graham has mentioned, that digitization is important, but when we talk the smallholder farmers, a kind of the kind of physical touch or personal touch is also needed, because sometimes they feel disconnected when we talk. We believe more on digitization thing, and then I think when we talk about this fourth theme, like David and Christina has highlighted, I think if we can work around this theme for long term, like in the case, in our case, we have already encouraged farmers to go for agroforestry. So when we talk agroforestry, I think that is already, they are already in the path for climate adaptive, kind of thing, climate friendly agriculture. And we are encouraging them to adopt clean energy, to shift to solar energy and hydro energy to cook, and then to reduce their dependency on firewood. So that is another example. And then we have a package that, if they adopt agroforestry and clean energy, then we have a kind of incentive, like, to give some insurance, or, to reduce a certain percent of loan. So they feel that, I get this benefit because I am more sensitive to the climate. So this kind of thing is needed to think big, I mean, we, rather than doing a small thing here and there, if we can plan, like I pull out the attention of Puneet, like if we have a database, so where we can put all this information, so how farmers is already, more sensitive and then aware about climate things, and and their behavior are now more climate friendly, and net zero emission, those kind of data, if we can collect, and then if some farmers, they are already contributing to reduce CO2, then if we have a mechanism, like could be, some kind of insurance or some kind of technology, we can provide them incentive. So I think this climate thing is still when we talk, I have put a question on measurement thing also, this is a very tricky thing, how we will measure the climate credit, how the farmers can benefit. Those things are still not very clear, and the technology, farmers, how they can adopt new technology, all those things. I think today today discussion raised a lot of concern around those issues. So we need to really plan all those things. And in Nepal, I think we are far behind, and the farmers are not aware, and even we are not very much educated on what is this climate thing, how we can go ahead, and how we'll be moving on coming few years or few days, kind of thing. Yes, that's.
Thank you, Navraj. Thank you very much. I have one more question before I ask the panelists for a final parting sentence or thought. And this is from Akhtar Hamed, the COO of Sajeda. Akhtar, did you want to reveal yourself and ask the question direct? Welcome.
Right. Yeah. Hi, Graham. How are you?
Good.
Basically, I've been observing this eco for some time and seen many interventions, but as of my understanding, on the basis of the context of Bangladesh and the agro population, I think we need to find out a mechanism for them to earn. My question is, can you run a research on, are these farmers not getting enough from their crop when they're growing high yield crop? Their production have gone up. Now they can produce more output from their small holding of land, but still they're poor, still not they're getting the right price. Is it the large corporate extortion on end product? And that's what they buy from the market. So their income is basically depleting from this. They could save more, but they cannot, because the crop they're producing, they have to purchase that crop when it is coming on a pack. How it is impacting their life? A. Number two, I have seen a couple of tryouts, and one of the tryout was done by Solidariat. They created a village supermarket, but that has not clicked. And to my understanding, it didn't click because middleman came in a very high velocity with creating discomfort in the farmer's mind that their crop, if they bring it to village supermarket once, twice, and if they cannot sell, then the middleman will not buy it. So how these ecosystem can we break? And I think the potential to give the farmer a better income lies there, meaning the input they're purchasing at a very rational price and getting a little more from the crop they're growing. Yes, loans, insurance, all comes into this ecosystem with its need. Digitization, you rightly said, Graham, they cannot read, and their feature phone cannot store the required amount of SMS which we send. So once it is full, the next SMS does not reach into their smartphone. So what is the alternative?
So let me ask Puneet to answer that, because he's worked on exactly these problems and the e-chopals in India. So Puneet, briefly, because we're now overrunning a bit.
Sure. Akhtar, what I mean, you're very right, and what we really find is that the in the value chain, the share of margins that really gets to the smallholder it's much smaller, and majority of it is retained further down the value chain. And really, in the smallholder, farmers are compelled to, even if it is high value crops, they're compelled to sort of dispose them off at the farm gates, and very few have limited opportunity to add value or to kind of be able to process or really therefore kind of add value there. So, but what we find is at least some silver lining through some of our programs, through with the farmer producer organizations, farmer collectives as one opportunity, and also involvement of these intermediaries in value addition, and then retail, direct retail. So if you come to some of the eastern parts of India, Bihar, Orissa, etc., we could show you some of these models where direct retail to consumers, where the sourcing happens from farmers through a kind of aggregation through farmer collectives with some sort of efficiency gains through digitization and so on. There has been an improvement in the margins, the overall value realization, and so on. So I think there are examples there, which of course not at scale, but have sort of opportunity to as models that can potentially be scaled up. And very quickly, responding to Navraj, what you mentioned. So what we see is that there is awareness about innovation. Many leading farmers, they are aware of good practices, climate resilient, regenerative agriculture practices, and so on. But it's a lot about how they can be scaled up, how they can diffuse in the ecosystem, and that is where we see the potential of some of the digital solutions or platforms that I talked about, which can, together with the physical interface, enable diffusion of innovations both from a supply side, but also in the ecosystem itself in the local communities. I'll stop here.
Great. Thanks so much, Puneet. Last comment from Emilio and Christina, and then I think we'll have to wrap up. I hope you'll forgive us, Pedro.
Maybe just a final reflection of mine. I think there's a lot of dynamism in terms of experimentation of the type of digital innovations that can be applied to transform smallholder agriculture. I think we need to keep on doing that, but we also need to kind of very quickly move into taking stock into what works and what doesn't. And it's a natural process. I think this is something that this type of experimentation with a new digital angle is new in the agro space, in the smallholder space. So we should kind of like be aware that we need to start very quickly moving into what are those specific AgTechs, specific financial solutions, what kind of public-private collaboration will be needed, because this is not going to be a totally a private sector led kind of work. so that we can start getting a bit more concrete and being able to respond many of the questions that have just been laid out from the public, right?
Great. Thanks, Emilio. Christina?
Sure, I'll be brief. And I think it's a Chinese refrain that says, in crisis, there is opportunity. And I think as we, are already trying to tackle the productivity lapses that exist and hunger and livelihood insecurity, and then add on top of that potential droughts, more rainfall variability, fires, heat, extreme heat. Within all of that, it can seem very, very desperate, but what I see within this community is opportunity to really drive a wedge in and try and experiment with new approaches, bundled approaches, digital and non-digital approaches that are coupled together, more integrated, connected to finance, et cetera, that I think truly has the power to be more transformational. So I think that there's a lot of problems to solve, but I think within this broad sphere of multiple crises, of poly crises, we do have an important opportunity and responsibility to seize it, I think. I'll stop there.
Great. That is a wonderful sentiment on which to end. And let me thank my co-speakers. Really appreciate all the effort you put in. I'll let Christina go back to her hand-to-hand negotiation, and all the best with that. And thank everyone else for attending. Really appreciate it. And thank you to David and Jesse and Nelly and all involved in the CFAR Alliance. This is a really important initiative, and I can't thank them enough for having taken it. With that, thank you and goodbye.